Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My apologies for not being able to upload recently. The COVID-19 pandemic has been quite challenging on us lecturers. I've been struggling to keep up with my class and upload new videos, but I'm back again. All right. So we're going to be covering the biological chapter in the AS studies. First up, it's Dement Kleitman, study about sleep and REM. Well, let's see what they have to say. Now, before this class, I usually ask my students, tell me your dreams, guys. I want to know what you guys have been dreaming about the past few days. And usually I'll get a few responses, okay? For example, one of my students, they said, I dreamt I got chased by a clown. I was like, okay, that's cool. Another student wrote a bit of an essay. I went to a castle of ice and my friend slipped, but my head was not injured. Weird. And then I went to a beach and it became high tide. I lost my slipper and I couldn't retrieve my ball that was still there because there was lightning. Very, very scary. This sounds like a typical dream, right? It sort of like goes all over the place. It kind of makes sense, but not really, right? So I like, what do you guys think? If you're listening to the video, what are your dreams like? Maybe you should write them down. Keep a dream journal, right? Why? Some people ask, can dreams be interpreted? Can we understand our dreams? Well, psychologist Nancy Ramakajut says that there are classic dreams that come to many people. You've probably had them before, right? A is being late for a final exam and not being prepared. I've got that fear. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, like, oh my gosh, I forgot my exam. Wait a minute, I'm a lecturer. There's no exam for me. Or perhaps being late for work and not knowing how to get there. I've got that before. Trying to run or scream and not being able to. I think oftentimes people think this is like sleep paralysis, right, where you can't breathe all of a sudden, right? But even these dreams will also have more specific meanings that differ by person to person. And usually, if you're feeling stressed at work or something's really, major changes in your life, you may get these kind of like stress dreams, quote unquote stress dreams. But generally speaking, dreams should be interpreted based on what a person is experiencing in their life and their background and their personality and so on, right? Can you really interpret dreams? Well, it's difficult to say. I'm not so well versed into that area of dream interpretation, but there's some people who do believe that dreams do showcase certain interesting aspects of the human psyche. But why do we dream? Right? Why do we dream? Now, there are a variety of reasons that have been given. I do actually have a video prepared, but I can't show you this video because of copyright issues, but you can find it on YouTube. I got it all from YouTube. And so there are a variety of reasons that are given. Like we dream to forget, for example. We dream to keep our brains working, which is the cortical activation theory. Some people believe we dream to rehearse. I particularly like this idea where we dream to sort of like clean our synapses, right, in the brain. The whole day we spent learning new stuff, and then when we dream, the brain sort of like does this deep cleaning and then cleans our synapses and takes away all the connections that are not necessary and keeps the ones which are important, right? Because the brain has limited number of connections, right? So I like that theory a lot. But at the end of the day, nobody really knows why we dream. We don't actually know, right? But it's an interesting thing to think about, the fact that all of us do it, but nobody really knows why. There isn't really a singular reason why. We've just got a few theories behind it. Anyway, today we're looking at Dement Kleitman's study from 1957, the relation of eye movements during sleep to dream activity, an objective method for the study of dreaming. Now, there are some key terms here that I want to break down so that you don't get overly confused. First off is REM versus NREM, EEG versus EOG, and stages of sleep. Right? So first of all, REM, what does it stand for? Rapid eye movement. So just imagine your eyes moving really quickly. Of course, you would not have noticed this in your own life. You would only be able to see it when you watch someone else dreaming. Okay? Try not to stare at people when they're sleeping. It looks a bit creepy, but you can find some videos online, right? And there's also NREM, which stands for non-rapid eye movement, right? So either one, your eyes are moving rapidly, REM, or your eyes are pretty much stationary, non-rapid eye movement, okay? Do not make the accidental mistake of calling it random eye movement, right? I've noticed students do this before in my class. It's not random, right? The word is rapid. They move quickly, but not randomly, right? There seems to be a certain pattern to their movement. There is another video I found online. Again, I won't be able to show you the full video, otherwise my video will be taken down. But if I just crop through, can you see his eyes just below that? And even a dog, can you see the dog's eyes are moving? The dog's actually fast asleep. But because the eyes are open, you can actually see the eyeballs are moving from left to right, right? Isn't that interesting, right? That even animals and humans have REM. Do animals dream? That's an interesting question to think about, right? There might be some evidence to suggest that indeed they do. right? But we won't be discussing animal dreams today. Today we're discussing human dreams. Now, moving on, we've got the EEG, right? EEG stands for electroencephalogram, right? Or electroencephalograph, as it's sometimes called, right? That's the machine that measures your brain waves, right? It measures your brain waves. It looks something like this. You attach electrodes all to the person's scalp and then all around in usually this spherical sort of fashion. And then all of the wires usually lead to one particular point, right? One singular point. We've also got EOG. What is EOG? Electrooculograph, right? So this is similar to the EEG, while the EEG measures brain waves, the EOG measures the potential of the muscles which contract and relax around your eyeballs, right? So kind of like, I can't really say eye waves, but it's measuring the contraction of muscles around your of your eyes, right? So when your eyes are moving, the EOG can measure that movement. When your brain is sort of like quote unquote moving in terms of brain waves, the EEG measures that movement. So you can find videos on YouTube as well that show this. So this gentleman has got the EOG there. As he moves his eyes up and down, look up and down. Oh, he's blinking a little bit, blinking. You can see on his graph, on his computer, that it's moving, right? It's moving. So there's the potential of the eye movement, the potential of the muscle, right? The action potential, right? It shows you the movement because it detects a little change in electrical frequency when he blinks or when he moves his eyes, all right? So, stages of sleep, right? There are stages of sleep. Sleep isn't just one big block of unconsciousness. In fact, quite a lot of things are happening when we sleep. Let's look at this graph, for example, right? So, first of all, at the top there is awake. When you're awake, your your brain waves are very, very short, very, in 1 second interval, you can see how much is in there, how many waves are in that 1 second there. We call these low voltage waves, high frequency beta waves, right? High frequency beta waves. And finally, when you're getting a bit tired, you're feeling a bit drowsy, right? You go into alpha waves, right? Alpha waves. Some people say that you get alpha waves when you're in a meditative state, for example. You can see the difference in the waves there. It's a lot higher, a lot closer together. And then in stage 1 of sleep, it starts to relax again. It starts to still fairly low voltage, I believe, and you get something called theta waves, or theta waves, depending on whether you're British or American. Theta means the same thing. All right, and finally in stage 2, you get these sleep spindles, where you get a lot of this activity in just small little bursts like that, sleep spindles. Finally, you're getting deeper and deeper into sleep, and stage 3 and stage 4, look at how different the waves are. Huge waves, right? Really slow, progressively more what is known as delta waves. Yeah, delta waves. Now, the last stage is the REM sleep stage. And notice how interesting it is to see that the REM stage is actually almost exactly the same as the first stage, which is being awake, right? So awake is obviously not when you're asleep. You're awake, you're conscious, you're awake, you're doing stuff. And REM sleep is pretty much mimicking the frequency of the awake stage, right? So that's interesting to note, right? Which is why some people say sleep is rather paradoxical. The brain waves indicate that this person should be awake, but actually they're asleep. They're completely unconscious, right? It's one of the curious things about sleep. But just keep in mind that REM waves are also low voltage and high frequency waves. It's like as if our brain is completely awake, and yet the body is fast asleep. Now, it happens in a cyclical sort of a manner, right? Sleep cycles throughout the night. So let's just highlight, first of all, the word cycles. As you can see here, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down, and then slowly you wake up, right? Now, there are usually enough cycles to fit in about, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 sleep cycles, and it fits in about 8 hours comfortably. That's also one of the reasons why people always encourage you to take, about 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. That's really good. It's healthy because that seems to be what our body naturally requires. All right. So REM, as you can see there, REM happens right there. So first you have to fall asleep, and then after the first NREM stage, your brain slowly goes back to a very light stage of sleep. But this is now the REM. It's not about to wake up yet. You're entering the REM, where your eyeballs start moving quickly. This is actually a very light stage of sleep. You're not actually in deep sleep when you're dreaming. Right? And as you can see, the size of the REM actually increases later in the night. So towards the first and second hour of sleep, the REM period is very short. All right? But towards the 7th and 8th hour, just before you wake up, the REM period is much longer. That's interesting, and you should keep that in mind as well. We also have the NREM, as I mentioned, right down there. Right? So it starts by going to NREM. which is stage 3 and stage 4 deep sleep. And then slowly your brain goes to REM and then back into NREM and then go back to REM again, then drops to NREM and then goes up to REM, and then the NREM also gets higher and higher as you slowly begin to wake up towards the end of your 8-hour cycle. All right? NREM, obviously, as you can see here, happens in the deepest stages of sleep. Or does it? Well, we'll see a question later regarding NREM. The EEG is what measures all of this activity, right? As we saw earlier from the previous page, the EEG can measure the different brain waves and how they look like. And so when scientists are looking at these brain waves, they say, okay, from this moment to this moment, that's the activity of the slow waves, rather the stage 3 and stage 4 waves, right? Or from this moment to this moment, I can see that, oh, this person is showing me the REM waves, right? So we use the EEG to measure the sleep cycles, and this is what people have come up with over the years. Now, what have some past researchers uncovered regarding sleeping and dreams, right? Aserinsky and Kleitman in 1955, they discovered, or rather they observed periods of REM during sleep, right? So they did make some observations that, hey, people's eyeballs keep moving when they sleep. Wonder why? In fact, they also noticed a high incidence of dream recall in participants who awakened during these REM periods. Dement then went on to do another study in 1955, where he said the occurrence of REM observed was in both normal and schizophrenic participants. Now that's interesting because people at that time when they were researching about sleep, I think we didn't really know much about it. We didn't really know why it's happening. And it was interesting to note that whether or not you have a severe psychological disorder such as schizophrenia and whether or not you're normal, you both seem to have REM. So that's interesting, right? Dement and Kleitman in 1955 did another study where they found that REM seemed to appear at regular intervals in relation to a cyclic change in the depth of sleep during the night as measured by the EEG. This is basically putting towards what I showed you in the previous slide, but keep in mind, in the year 1955 and so on, before that perhaps as well, people didn't really know about REM and sleeping and sleep cycles at that time. We had not really had a chance as humanity had yet developed methodology to study sleeping and dreaming, right? So until that time, this was kind of like new. To us, we might like, I already know that sleep happens in stages and there's a cycle and all that. We already know that because it's common knowledge, right? But at that time, it wasn't common knowledge, right? And as you can see, Dement and Kleitman really enjoy studying about sleep. I wonder if they were ever sleep participants in their own studies. Here's a fun question for you guys to think about. Do babies dream? I've asked friends this question on social media, I asked my students in class. I get a mixed bag of responses, right? I was reading a little bit about it online, and I found, some articles suggest that no, babies don't really dream, simply because they don't have enough experience to construct reality in their brains, right? So they have to be of a certain age, usually around the age of 2 perhaps, then they start dreaming, right? They have enough experience in life. But think about it from another perspective. We know for a fact that REM and dreaming is associated to each other. Do babies have REM? They do. They do have REM. They do display REM movements when they sleep. So are they dreaming? And if they are, and they've just been born, what could they possibly be dreaming about? In fact, one lady, a friend of mine, she's a young mother, and she told me that, she really genuinely believes that the babies are having some sort of a good dream, because she noticed that children, they smile when they sleep, right? A baby smiles when it sleeps, like as if it feels good, or perhaps it's just imagining the mother, perhaps as it's dreaming. We don't know. It's a bit hard to test the baby, but, maybe one day we'll come up with a way of doing it, right? So what are the aims of this study? Firstly, whether dream recall differs between eye movements in the REM stage and quiescent or NREM stages of sleep. So the word quiescent, basically the root word is quiet. Essentially, your eyes are not moving. They're stationary. They're not moving around, right? So we call that quiet or quiescent stages of sleep, NREM, right? So let me visually show you what this aim is looking at, right? So remember this graph earlier, the REM and NREM cycles, okay? So we're looking at whether or not REM and NREM have a difference. But what difference? Whether dream recall differs, right? So is there a difference in the dream recall between the REM stages and the NREM stages? Essentially, you have to wake them up during either one of those stages and ask them, hey, do you remember if you had a dream? Something along those lines, okay, as we're going to see in a moment, right? The second aim was to see if there's a positive correlation between subjective estimates of dream duration and the length of the REM period before waking rather. Right, so again, the same graph, let me visually show you what it means. So we've got the REM period at the top there. Let's say, for example, this entire period of REM, according to my EEG, lasted for approximately 15 minutes. Right? Let's just say, for example. Right? So now I want to see whether there's a positive correlation between the duration of that REM period, rather the length of the REM period, and whether or not someone can estimate how long their dream was, right? Because if we assume that dreaming is happening during REM, then if I wake someone up in the middle of their REM, they should be able to give me, kind of an estimate of how long they were dreaming for. So let's say in between of the 15 minutes, I wake them up at the 5-minute mark. So I should get kind of like responses that tell me that, hey, I think I was dreaming for about 5 minutes. Or will the person say, I think I was dreaming for about 30 minutes, right? And so the question would be like, how long was I dreaming for? When you ask them, how long was I dreaming for? Was it 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes? So we're going to look at how that plays out in this research as well, right? They want to see whether it's positively correlated. Remember, what does a positive correlation mean? It means if one variable increases, the other variable also shows an increase. Or if one variable decreases, the other one also shows a decrease. So it's not that one causes the other one to happen. This is correlation, remember, not causation. We're just saying that both these variables are related in a way that they move in the same direction. And there was a third aim. The third aim was to see if eye movement patterns are related to dream content. So remember, we talked about the EOG and stuff like that. As your eyeballs move around, the EOG can measure that. What about dream content? Let's say you imagine yourself floating in a sea of purple, I don't know what that is, jellyfish or something like that, right? And then it's going to measure, the EOG will be measuring your eyes potential, right? Are your eyes moving up? Are your eyes moving down? Are they moving from the left to the right? Where are they moving? And is there any sort of a relationship between the movement of your eyes and the content of the person's dream, right? So this isn't really quite an experiment for the third aim. It's more like just seeing or not whether there seems to be a logical connection between them, right? Let's look at the research method. The first aim that we want to look at, you need to use a laboratory experiment to answer it, right? So using a laboratory experiment, we've got IVs and DVs. The IV here is the period of the participant being awakened, right? Remember, what were the two periods of sleep that we talked about? It can be either REM or NREM, right? So either I wake them up in the REM stage or I wake them up when they're in the NREM stage. How do I know which stage they're in? I look at their EEG. The EEG will tell me, okay, this person is in which stage of sleep, right? And then the DV here is dream recall. Remember, we want to see where do they recall more or less dreams. Is it during the REM or the NREM, right? The operational definition, of course, of what a dream should be considered, whether a dream should be considered a real dream, is whether it's coherent and fairly detailed in their dream description, right? So people need to be able to give some detail, tell the story of their dream. It should make some kind of sense, right? Shouldn't be overly complicated or all over the place. And it needs to have some level of detail, right? That's when it's considered a dream. The design of this study uses a within subjects design or repeated measures, same word rather, synonym. And what that means is that all participants go through every level of the IV. So look back at the IV, there are two levels, REM and NREM. If I say that it's within subjects, what does that mean? It means that all my participants were woken up at some points in time during REM and at other points in time during NREM, right? So again, just remember, this is the first aim where we want to where we're looking for a difference in dream recall between the REM and the NREM stages. All right, moving on. The second aim is the correlation. We need a correlational design to help answer our second aim. So don't get confused. It's still a laboratory experiment overall. We're still doing the experiment in a laboratory setting. People are coming to the lab to sleep. However, to answer the second aim, we need to use a correlation design specifically. Why? Because of the way that the aim is phrased. For example, we're looking at dream duration, right? And the length of the REM period, right? Dream duration and length of REM period. Now, again, for correlational kind of a design, we don't speak of them in terms of independent variables or dependent variables. We just call them variables, right? Two variables, and we want to see whether they move in the same direction or in different directions. Okay. Now, dream duration, operational definition would be that participants were asked to estimate the duration that they had been dreaming for, either 5 minutes or 15 minutes, okay? That was not the original operational definition. At first, when they did it, if a participant was woken up, the researchers would then ask them to estimate to the nearest minute how long they had been dreaming for, right? So they could have said 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 and a half, 12 minutes, for example. You can't say half a minute because they said round it up to the nearest minute. And so, unfortunately, that was a little bit too difficult, I believe, for the researchers. They wrote in their own study that it proved to be too difficult, I believe, for them to measure all these individual numbers. So what they then changed the operational definition to make it easier. They just asked participants to pick, okay, do you think it was 5 minutes or do you think it was 15 minutes in terms of the length of their dream? Although that being said, there were some participants, when given the first option of just estimating to the nearest minute, that in fact they could actually pick out the exact minute of time that was that they were dreaming for, right? So that's pretty interesting, right? But anyway, we are moving on to the 5 and 15 minutes, okay, for our study. The number of words in dream narratives was also used as a measure of dream duration. All right. So what happens is that when a person is describing their dream, the researchers took note of how many words was used in their description. That was also used as another data reference point. Okay. So remember, this is about understanding whether if I wake someone up in the middle of their sleep, are they able to estimate, especially with regards to the REM period, are they able to estimate how long they were dreaming for, right? The third aim is the self-reports. Remember, we talked about the eye movements, the EOG, as well as the dream content. So we want to see whether or not the content of a person's dream is in any way related to their eye movements, okay? Now, the procedure is fairly straightforward. Researchers told the participants, don't drink any caffeine or alcohol on the day of the experiment, right? It's a measure of standardization, right? You want to make sure there are no extraneous variables from a person having drunk, 5 cups of coffee before coming into the experiment. They wouldn't be able to go to sleep, right? They arrived at the laboratory a little before their usual bedtime and attached electrodes near the eyes and the scalp. They didn't do the attaching. The researchers did the attaching of the electrodes near the eyes and as well as on the scalp. Right? Now, they also said come before your usual bedtime. So, it depends on you. Right? I usually sleep around 2 to 3 a.m. in the morning. So if I had joined this experiment, I'd probably have to come in at 1 a.m. Right? But perhaps some of you might sleep at 7 p.m., 9 p.m. Right? So depending on your usual bedtime, that's when you come in. So it's a good measure of standardization. Well, not really standardization, but to reduce any possible extraneous variables. Okay, they went to bed in a quiet and dark room. So that's the standardization part, right? Everybody was sleeping in the same environment, dark, quiet room. Okay, electrode wires were attached to the top of the head and then from there to a lead box at the head of the bed in a single cord to minimize possible entanglement and allow free movement for the participants. So some people move when they dream. Do you guys move when you dream? I tend to move a lot when I dream, when I'm sleeping rather. And so to prevent them from perhaps choking on the wiring, they made sure that the wire was all tied up, sort of like in a ponytail fashion at the top of the head, and so they could move freely if they wanted to as they were sleeping, right? Participants were then woken up by a loud doorbell at various times during the night. After that, they returned to sleep, usually in less than 5 minutes, and the time of awakening differed across the 3 aims, right? So just basically quite straightforward, the procedure, right? Just wake them up with a doorbell, ring, 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 ring. And then I forgot to put in one more point. There was a tape recorder beside them that they could speak into as they recalled their dream, right? So the alarm would go off, they'd remember their dream, they would speak it out into the recorder that would capture their dream content. Sample consisted of only 9 participants, a pretty small sample. 7 of them were male, 2 were female. That being said, was only 5 participants who actually studied in greater detail. The remaining 4 were used to confirm the results. Reason being because some of them did not stay throughout the entire experiment. They only slept for a few occasions, and therefore the data wasn't really sufficient. However, there were 4 or 5 participants who really did provide more data. So they were the ones that were studied in more detail. Oh, another video clip. This is a lovely one. This is from Inception, right? The movie Inception. This young girl is able to, manipulate the dream space. It's pretty interesting. Very, very interesting movie. Gives you a visual idea of what dreams might look like, right? If dreams actually could play themselves out in the real world. Pretty fascinating. I won't show you the whole video, but you can go and check it out. Excellent movie as well. Really plays tricks with your mind. All right. Quick question. How many hours do you sleep? Right? How many hours do you sleep? Think about the answer for a moment. right? Well, now, ideally, based on the sleep cycle schedule, we should be getting about 7 to 8 hours per night. I know I'm not. I'm getting at most maybe 3 or 4 hours per night if I'm really busy, which is really not good, right? Sleep is important for health. We don't exactly know why, but we know that it is important, right? Here's a quick picture of the sleep habits of millionaires. Jeff Bezos, who is now the second richest person in the world, he's just currently been superseded by Elon Musk, and he sleeps 8 hours, right? Oprah Winfrey, the third one over there, she sleeps 8 hours. Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, he's the only one who sleeps so little, five and a quarter hours, right? That's interesting, right? But Warren Buffett, right at the bottom there, also sleeps about 8 hours. So again, this pretty interesting chart showing you that a lot of successful people seem to sleep more. So if you sleep more, will you get $1 billion? Well, that's exactly why this is more towards correlation, not causation, right? Why do we forget our dreams? This is a question that I often get from my class. Well, I was looking online and I found some points that I think I could share. First of all is to do with the action of the hippocampus, right? Some data shows that during some sleep stages, the hippocampus is sending information to the cortex, but not receiving any in return, right? Adrenaline. This unidirectional communication would allow sending of memories from the hippocampus to the brain's cortex for long-term storage, but new information wouldn't be registered by the hippocampus, which is why when you just wake up, you're barely holding onto the edges of your dream, right? If you quickly write them down, you'll remember it, but if you don't do it immediately and something distracts you, the dream is usually gone forever, right? Or perhaps the explanation lies in our neurochemical structure, right? During REM sleep, acetylcholine, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, it's always a tricky one, acetylcholine returns to wakefulness levels, but noradrenaline stays low. Scientists have yet to work out this puzzle, but some suggest that this particular combination of neurotransmitters might be the reason why we forget our dreams. It's possible, right? Perhaps having too much of one particular transmitter kind of like prevents us from remembering our dreams. Now, here are some student misconceptions that I notice as students answer these questions for their homework, or perhaps they just ask me in class. For example, some ask, are there only 2 electrodes between the eyes? Right? What do you think? Think about the answer before I reveal it. Based on what you've read about the Dement Kleitman study, are there only 2 electrodes between the eyes? No, there are 2 or more electrodes actually, and they are around the eyes. They're not between the eyes only. They could be above, below, on the right side or the left side of the human eyes, right? And there are 2 or more electrodes. The authors don't specify how many, right? Besides that, also EOG measures the eye movements and EEG measures the brain, not movement, but rather brain waves, right? As we know, the brain doesn't move, it's stationary in our skull, but we can measure its waves, right? Whereas in EOG, our eyes are moving. Pretty interesting, right? So some students say that NREM occurs only during deep sleep. What do you think? Yes, no, agree or disagree, neutral? Well, the answer is that actually NREM occurs in all stages of sleep except REM. Right? If you look at this chart by Very Well Mind, I love their illustrations. For example, in stage 1, what do they call stage 1? NREM stage 1. And then stage 2 is NREM stage 2. NREM stage 3. But only when it comes to REM sleep, it allows, that's when it doesn't become the NREM anymore, right? Whereas for all other levels of sleep, we can refer to them as NREM. All right. Another statement, REM sleep induces sleep paralysis that protects us from being harmed from doing things unconsciously. What do you think? Agree, disagree? It's almost right. There's a slight issue there. It's not REM sleep that induces the sleep paralysis. It's rather GABA and glycine that induce sleep paralysis. What is sleep paralysis? Is when your body is unable to move as you are dreaming. Why does the body do this? Possibly because it wants us to be protected. We don't want to act out our dreams violently. Sometimes we have violent and scary dreams, right? So the GABA and glycine neurotransmitters seem to achieve this, right? Now, what happens during stages 3 and 4, right? There's muscle and tissue repair, yes. There's deep sleep, yes. But does GABA and glycine chemicals cause paralysis in stage 3 and stage 4? The answer is no. GABA and glycine are only released during REM sleep, right? This is a very famous video that I remember seeing when I was doing my undergraduate degree. It's this video of a cat, and the cat's brain has been altered slightly in the sense that the hormones, I believe, the hormones of some of the GABA and glycine have been removed, or that brain structure that produces it has been removed, so that when this cat is actually fast asleep and dreaming, it's actually acting out its dream. In fact, it looks like it's awake, but everything else will give you evidence according to the scans that this cat is indeed dreaming. And it looks like it's fighting with something or trying to catch a fly. Interesting. Do animals have dreams? Well, it certainly seems like they act them out, right? This is a video that shows sleep disorders, right? What happens in dreaming and sleep disorders. So you can see this old man, right? They're shaking on the bed, they're moving around. They look like they're afraid or something. They're completely fast asleep. They're completely unconscious, but they keep moving around, right? Moving around like that because their body is not paralyzing the limbs of the body as it should be, right? Or in this case, the guy's body is mostly paralyzed except his hand. There was this video I found whereby this couple, right, this gentleman, unfortunately, one night he acted out in his dreams and it was rather violent, and he started beating his wife, he started assaulting her while he was fast asleep, in fact. That was the strangest part. And then the wife, out of panic, called 911. Rather unfortunately, they separated the family, which was very difficult for them because the courts want to make sure that nobody is abused at home. But the family themselves realizes that the father does have a problem, right? He has a sleep disorder. It's not that he wanted to act it out on purpose, right? So there's a lot of research that needs to be done to understand sleep better so that we too can improve the lives of people with sleep disorders. Okay, let's look at the results. All right, this is a summary of the experiments. Okay, let's break it down together. This is how I like to break it down. I usually ask questions, right? First of all, notice the initials there. Why use initials? Why do you think? Well, the main reason is because we want to make sure that we protect people's identity and we keep it confidential. By doing so, nobody can identify these people. What was the longest average sleeping time? If we look at the average sleeping time, the last column, which one is the biggest number? 7 hours and 50 minutes on average, right? On average. Who slept the most nights? All right, let's look at nights slept, which is the second column, 6, 12, 17, 11, 9, 2, 1, 1, 2. Obviously, it's Casey with 17 nights slept. Now, you'll notice something. Look at how the bottom few participants, right? KK, SM, DM, and MG, some of them only slept 2 nights, some of them only 1 night, and then they quit from the program, right? So that was what I was mentioning earlier, right? The researchers were forced to use the 5 participants who did actually sleep at least a few times, and then the rest of them were just used for confirmation basis, right? But they didn't really provide enough data. Who was awakened the most times, right? Who experienced the most awakenings? Let's look at the third column. Awakenings experienced most by WD. Right. Now, let's look at this table. Instances of dream recall after awakenings during periods of rapid eye movement or periods of non-rapid eye movement. Now, this is actually answering aim number 1. We want to see whether there's a difference in the dream recall, right, between REM and NREM. So how many dreams were recalled in REM, rather? Right, let's look at it. REM, we've got dream recall in the first column, 152, and NREM, we've got dream recall about 11, right? 11 plus 152. Or rather, excuse me, we're just looking at the REM corner, it's 152 dreams recalled in REM. What about dreams recalled in NREM? If you look at that column, it's only 11, right? Now, excuse me, I should actually pause there for a moment. If you notice this, the results are saying that 152 dreams were recalled during REM and only 11 dreams were recalled during NREM. That's a result. What would I say as the conclusion? How would I conclude that result? Right? I could probably say something as simple as dream recall happens more often during REM, or rather dreaming seems to happen during REM as opposed to NREM, right? Deception. Was there any deception in this experiment? Yes, there was some deception. In the case of WD, right, was told that he would be awakened only when the recording indicated that he was dreaming. But actually, REM and NREM awakenings were then interspersed randomly. So imagine you come in for the experiment, and you go through the informed consent, and then I tell you specifically, hey, by the way, I'm only going to wake you up when you're in the middle of an REM, right? So I look at my EEG and I say, okay, this guy's entered REM, that's when I'm going to wake you up, and that's when you need to either give me a statement or explain to me, your dreams and so on and so forth, right? But in his case, although he was lied to, in actual fact, they continued to wake him up at different points in time, right? Sometimes in REM, sometimes in NREM. And so what's the effect of that, right? Now, we expect him to perhaps show some social desirability and pretend like, oh, okay, actually, there should be more people working here. Maybe we should call an emergency number. But, I just lost track of I suddenly fell into a dream. I suddenly lost track of my words. Let me rephrase what I was saying, right? So he did not lie about his dreams because, as you can see in the NREM dream recall column, he only recalled one dream when they woke him up during NREM. But I told him before the experiment, hey, we're going to wake you up only when you're dreaming, right? So if he wanted to be a socially desirable participant, he would have lied and said, oh yeah, I remember this dream, and he would have made up something. But obviously he didn't, right? If he genuinely didn't remember, he genuinely did not seem to remember. So that's good. I mean, it gives us some idea that, the experimental condition is working. Of course, the unfortunate thing is that deception was used. Now, let's look at the results of dream duration estimates after 5 minutes or 15 minutes of rapid eye movements, right? So they would wake them up after 5-minute, 15-minute intervals. Which aim is this? This is aim number 2, right? So who got the most right? Was it the group of 5 minutes or group of 15 minutes? Well, if you look at just the right column, the 15 minutes group got it 47 times correct, right? Which basically means that after 15 minutes of REM activity, the researchers would wake up the participant and then ask them if they had any dream recall and how many words that they used, right? WD was the one who had the most dream recalls correctly. Next question, who got the most wrong? Who got the most wrong? Let's look at that. Who got the most wrong? If you look at it, it is DN. DN actually got the most wrong. 2 on the 5 minutes, 5 on the 15 minutes. So 7 wrong altogether. Were both groups accurate in estimating dream duration? What do you think? Did they make accurate choices? Well, a little bit of yes and no, right? On one side, they were accurate because, they got 45 right and 47 right, so that's excellent. But they did make a few mistakes. However, in comparison, the correct answers definitely outdo the mistakes. Okay, 45 plus 47, so that's 92. Yeah, 92. I just had to count on my fingers there to be sure. That's pretty cool. Okay, now correlation between the duration of REM periods in minutes and the number of words in the dream narrative. Now remember I mentioned earlier for the third aim, right? They're looking to see whether or not there's a positive correlation. What is the positive correlation? Let's look at the R column, right? The second last column, R value that stands for Pearson's R correlation, and you can see that all positive. That's right, not a single negative correlation there. What does that mean? If it's positive, it moves in the same direction. Therefore, we are saying that the duration of REM periods and the number of words seem to be related in the same direction, right? Were the correlations significant, right? So knowing that they're positive and negative only helps a little bit. Were they indeed significant? Well, if you look at the last column, you'll see the p-values are all less than 0.05. And for the social sciences, 0.05 is the standard rule of thumb. So all of them are indeed significant correlations. However, when it comes to recalling dreams, the authors noted there could be a lot of individual differences, such as, remember the example I showed you at the beginning of class, right? My students submitted their dream journals. One of them wrote a very short, sweet, simple sentence, chased by a clown, 4 marks. The other one wrote an essay, right? How many words was it? About 49 words, right? So which one's going to correlate more strongly? Obviously the bigger bird, right? Excuse me. Obviously which one's going to correlate more strongly? Obviously the one with more words, rather. Okay, eye movements. Okay, eye movements. Now, 3 of the dreams had vertical eye movements, right? Remember we used the EOG to study the eye movements, right? So looking at the pictures here, which picture do you think fits this idea that your eyes start moving in a vertical fashion? Right, vertical. Which one is it? Up and down? Yeah, there was one example of a subject who was dreaming of climbing up a series of ladders and looking up and down as he climbed, right? So I got a picture of that climbing a ladder, looking up and down. That would have resulted in, rather they noticed that in that dream, during when he recalled that dream, his eyes were moving up and down, up and down, up and down, vertical. Another one was a subject who dreamed of being standing at the bottom of a tall cliff and operating some sort of a hoist or crane mechanism, looking up at climbers at various levels and down at the hoist machinery, right? So again, that looking up and down movement, right? Lastly, there was one dreamer who was throwing basketballs into a net, right? First shooting and then looking at the net, then looking down at the floor to pick up another basketball, right? So any of those movements, or rather any of those dreams, would have resulted in a vertical eye movement. And that's what they noticed. Next, what about horizontal eye movements? This one was not as common. In the one situation where someone someone had horizontal eye movements, they remembered a dream where they and someone else was throwing tomatoes at each other, in front of the dreamer, right? So the dreamer's eyes are moving left, right, left, right. It's just like watching a tennis game, left, right, or badminton game, left, right, right? So in the same way, this person had horizontal eye movement when they were dreaming. 10 dreams had little to no eye movement. So what picture is that? That's actually the picture below, right? Little to no eye movement. Oh, excuse me, I'm mistaken. That's actually the picture on the top right-hand corner where participants were, for example, looking at something in the distance or watching something like, perhaps looking at the tree, looking at mountains or at the ocean in the distance, right? So your eyes don't really need to move that much, okay? Lastly, there were 21 dreams with mixed movements, right? Mixed movements mean they're all over the place. Subjects were always looking at things which are close to them in a dream, or perhaps a group of people, talking to a group of people, looking for something, or fighting with someone. Right? Those were the kind of dreams that produced mixed movements in the eyes. Now, how did they confirm this? Right? They wanted to know, are we measuring it correctly? Could it just be because they're asleep that their eyes are moving like this? Well, in order to confirm the meaningfulness of these relationships, 20 naive subjects, as well as 5 of the experimental subjects, were asked to observe distant and close-up activity while awake. So this time they did sort of like a little mini study, but while people were awake, right? The naive subjects are all new, except for the 5 which were used from the experiment earlier, right? Horizontal and vertical electrodes were then attached. The eye movement potentials in all cases were comparable in both amplitude and pattern to those occurring during dreaming. So there's slight differences, but in general, it's almost exactly the same, which means that it is safe indeed and armed. Rather it is, I lost my train of thought for a moment there. Yeah, so basically this little mini follow-up experiment confirms for us that even when people are awake and they're looking at something in the distance, their eyes don't move as much, right? As well as the other things like, turning from side to side, watching a game, for example, right? Now we come to discussions and conclusions. Well, first and foremost, were there more dreams recalled during REM versus NREM? Yes, there were, definitely. But could any dreams have occurred in NREM? Now, the researchers don't rule out the possibility completely. It's possible, right? There were a few people who recalled a dream in NREM, but the interpretation that's given is because it's such a vast difference, it's possible that a dream from the REM stage was being carried over, just like how we study carryover effects, into the next stage, which is the NREM stages, right? And so they may have gotten mixed up. Perhaps, we don't know for sure, right? More dream recalls were noticed in the later hours of sleep. Why do you think that is? People were able to recall their dreams better or more in more frequency when they were entering the 7th or 8th hour of sleep rather than the 1st or 2nd. Why do you think that is? Well, probably as we saw earlier, it's probably because the length of the REM is much longer towards the end of your sleep cycle. So more REM, more opportunity for dreaming. There was a positive correlation between the length of REM and the estimated dream duration. This was proven to be true. In fact, what it also suggests is that you can use REM as an objective measure of dreaming. Well, it's just a suggestion, but I think it's already being done quite effectively overseas. MRI scans, REM, EEG, EOG, and stuff like that. So it's a pretty objective measure, as we know, because it has a strong positive correlation, right? Significant positive correlation. Okay. Dream content and eye movements, what happened? They do indeed match up with each other, right? In fact, it's almost like you're awake, right? That's what the eye movements look like. It's almost like you're awake. Okay. Dreaming was previously associated with sort of different things like gastric contractions as well as foot twitches, right? Some people twitch their foot as they're falling asleep. I like to shake my feet before I fall asleep. It helps me sleep better for some reason. But dreaming was previously associated with these physical movements, right? A gastric sort of contraction and foot twitches. We now know that that's not true, right? In fact, a lot of past studies failed to observe REM, so they were skeptical about it. Why do you think they failed? Well, Dement Kleitman suggests 3 responses. Perhaps it's because the recording was done by sampling rather than continuously. So in Dement Kleitman's study, they recorded the entire 8 hours every night of the person's dreaming activity using the EEG, right? It's quite a lot of work. Whereas in this one, in past research, perhaps students or other researchers only took in short samples. And if you just take a sample rather than measuring continuously, you may accidentally miss the REM period, right? There was also a rather much lower amplification for REM potential, so you can't hear what they're giving us. You can't really see rather the EEG properly and clearly because there's not enough amplification, right? Now let's quickly discuss the strengths and weaknesses of this study. First and foremost is an experiment. What are the strengths of the experiment? It's a controlled environment. You can reduce the extraneous and confounding variables much more easily. You can strengthen the relationship between the IV and the DV because it's an experimental study. But what are the weaknesses? Weaknesses is the lack of ecological validity. Everybody's coming to sleep in a laboratory. People don't usually sleep in laboratories, right? So, there are some weaknesses to that in terms of the ecological validity of the study. What about the data? Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? Well, it's got a little bit of both, right? That's interesting, right? So quantitative data is the primary one. You want to see your records and what medical history you have, as well as the fact that you have the dreams, right, are measured rather in the EEG format, right? So that's all objective quantitative data, right? Which is less prone to researcher bias, which is excellent for us, makes everything more valid, right? So the data can be quite a good strength, right, for quantitative objective data. What about weaknesses? What are the weaknesses of quantitative data? Well, first and foremost, you don't really get an in-depth understanding into dreaming, right, by just using the EEG or the EOG. On the other hand, we have some qualitative data, right? The qualitative data in this case was not exactly used in the same way an interview handles qualitative data, but more in the sense that you can just ask the person to recall their dream, and then you make your interpretations based on their content, right? Ethics. Were there any ethical issues? Yes, there was some. There was a little bit of deception in the study, right? I believe the researchers obtained informed consent, and on the plus side, they made sure everybody's name was switched with just their initials. That way, the confidentiality is not broken, right? However, there was some deception used, and so hopefully there was debriefing done. Can't remember right now offhand whether or not debriefing was specifically mentioned in the study, but it should have been done, right? People should be aware what you're studying about so that they can agree to it fully. But in some cases, you use deception if it's necessary. In this case, WD was deceived, all right? Also, you can think about it, is it ethical for people to sleep in a laboratory, a foreign environment with a bunch of wires attached to their head, and the fact that they had to wake them up so many times every week or every day, in fact, is that considered an issue for ethics? Well, you could argue it that way, that it's not healthy, right? A healthy sleep cycle takes about 7-8 hours. If you keep waking them up in between the sleep cycle, may not be physically or psychologically healthy, right? Validity and reliability, is the study valid? It's pretty valid. It's got some good controls, things like asking participants not to drink caffeine, alcohol beverages, a lot of standardization there. So that helps us increase the validity of the study, making it more accurate. What about reliability? Also, standardized procedures lead to reliability by doing the experiment in the same way every single time, using the same doorbell, using the same recorder, same venue, same bed and all that, all good, right? Lastly, the sample. What can we say about the sample? Well, very, very small sample. So the issue there obviously would be low level of generalizability because there's so few participants, only 9 of them, and of that only half were studied in great detail, right? And however, on the other hand, there was a slight mixture of genders, although one was predominantly more than the other. So, they tried, I think, but, they were not so successful in getting people. So that was the only unfortunate thing, right? The sample is a bit small. It would be interesting to see if the sample was larger, what kind of results they might indeed find, right? Here's some general advice. We're done with the study, but here's some general advice that I give my students as well when it comes to sleeping. Sleep for at least 7 hours every night. Turn off your technology 1 hour before bedtime. This is extremely important. If you can't turn it off, you can switch on the night mode where the screen turns a bit dim and in orange in color. Excellent. It really helps me sleep a lot better than before. Avoid caffeine and alcohol. They're not good for sleep, right? And keep a consistent sleep schedule. So if you sleep at 9 p.m. every day, sleep at 9 p.m. every day. The moment you change it, everything changes, right? So just be aware of that. So some good tips. Thank you for watching this video. Hope you guys enjoyed and learned a little bit more about Dement Kleitman study. This is just a very brief overview. Please go and read the actual journal to get more information. I can't cover everything in one sitting, right? My name is Ross Stevenson. You can find me on Instagram, social media at MagicRoss7. Please help me out by liking this video, by perhaps dropping a comment or two, and also by subscribing especially. I really appreciate your time. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something about Dement Kleitman today. Stay tuned. I will be uploading more and more videos in time to come for your psychology A-levels.